Anybody else finding it really weird to be in a meeting without a face mask? I usually have people near me so that even when I'm on here, I've got a mask. Like seriously, I'm not recognizing this part of my face right now.
Oh, how things have changed, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Some people know this, but I am currently pregnant. And so I was saying to people in the office today that when I'm due at the end of May, and so I am envisioning there being a like September time when I actually take this baby to school and everybody snuggles them and hugs them. And that'll be the moment that this is actually all okay, when other people get to snuggle this baby. I know it won't be black and white like that COVID is over, but in my head, there's an actual like litmus test to when it'll feel over for me.
There's an actual end.
Yeah.
And when are you bringing this baby to the STF for us to snuggle? Just checking.
As soon as it's safe. I don't do well in mat leave. It's going to be hard enough. I will be looking for outings. Don't worry. I'll be there.
And you already have, you said a 4-year-old?
Yeah.
So this is number 2?
This is number 2. It's a boy. Excited. He's already got the hockey equipment ready for this one. So that's good. Yeah.
Important.
4 years.
Yeah, we didn't realize it was that big a deal to him until we told him it was a boy, and then he was very excited, and we realized that it might have been a much tougher sell for a girl.
All right, I'm thinking we just give it another minute or two while we're waiting for a few more people to sign in. I know we have a number more registered than have made it so far, and I'm just getting emails saying people are just signing in. So if everyone can be patient just for a couple of minutes, we'll get going.
Thanks, Jade. Jade complimented us. She hasn't even heard us speak yet.
Jade, you should wait until we're done and then feed us a compliment if you feel it necessary.
He's tricky, that one.
She says you're going to be amazing. No pressure, guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jade, you're pretty amazing too, so. Aw.
All right, I know there are still people signing in, but maybe we will get started. It is just after 7 and I do want to be respectful of your time. So welcome to our second online Salon series presentation. I'm so happy many of you have signed in on a cold Thursday evening. I know for some of you, this is report card time or right around report card time. For others, it's end of term. And really, all of us are in the middle of a global pandemic. So thank you for taking time to share in this conversation. I was thinking as I was preparing for this after the events in Washington last night, and indeed over the past weeks and months, this conversation seems more important tonight than ever. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ellen Whiteman, and I'm the manager of the McDowell Foundation. And the McDowell Foundation funds teacher-led research in the province, such as the amazing project you're about to hear about tonight. To start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. I do this land acknowledgement not out of a sense of duty or obligation, but from a genuine desire to recognize all of my relations and my own place on this shared land through the treaties. I also know we have people joining us from Treaty 4 and Treaty 1 territory, and I welcome you. Joining us tonight are leaders from across the province and beyond. There are local association leaders, STF executive, McDowell Foundation board members, current and former STF staff, superintendents, directors of education, school board trustees, principals, vice principals, the education critic, Ms. Carla Beck, and other formal and informal leaders in education, and I'd like to welcome you all. Our panel tonight consists of 5 leaders in various roles. Our two researchers, the Amy and Amy as I call them, Amy Orth and Amy Korver, are from Prairie Spirit School Division, and here to start off by sharing their findings from the research project. They're joined by our guest panelists, Angela Banda, STF Senior Administrative Staff and former principal, Samantha Becotte, STF Provincial Executive and current Vice President of the STF, and Lori Jeschke, Director of Education, Prairie Spirit School Division. Welcome to you all. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Amy and Amy will present for about 10 minutes, and they do have a video to share with you tonight. Then we hope to open up conversation. To ask questions or make comments, you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom of the screen. And if you prefer, you can vote on comments or questions that are there, and that'll help raise them to the top and ensure that we get to them. We will be recording tonight's session for those of you, so just so you're aware, for people who've been unable to attend and have asked that we make it available on the McDowell website. Jay from STFPL has kindly joined us to offer technical support tonight. So if you have technical questions, you could throw them in the chat for Jay. And Linda Aspen-Baxter from STFPL will be supporting the less formal part of the evening, both by monitoring the question and answer and helping me out as needed. So Amy and Amy, without further ado, I turn it over to you guys.
I'll get started. So just to kind of introduce the background to our topic, Amy and I have been colleagues and friends for a while. We've worked at the same schools, and we found ourselves, frankly, just having lots of conversations over wine. And, you know, during this time, it was the Me Too movement was coming up, and we started making connections between the education system and what was happening in politics and everything. And that was kind of the driving force, one, behind a lot of my work during my master's, and then also, which kind of took us down on the path of our McDowell research project. One of the things we really wanted to highlight was that our project is primarily on the journeys of women. It's not a comparative study by any means. We're not comparing our experiences to male experiences. This isn't a project where, you know, we wanted to bash the other gender. It was really about having the stories be told. And we got to do that, which was really awesome. When we look at the landscape in Saskatchewan, and we look at the numbers of women who are teachers compared to the numbers of women who are administrators, there is a difference. It has been increasing over the last probably 10, 15 years, but there's still a big discrepancy, especially as we move further up in formal administrative roles. So if we look at it, we have 84% of our elementary teachers are female, and about 50% of our elementary principals are female. When we move up into secondary, we have about 60% of our secondary teachers are women, and about 40% of our secondary principals are women. And then when we move into superintendents and directors of education, according to last year, we were sitting at around 40% of superintendents were women, and only 8 women in the province of Saskatchewan were directors of education. So kind of gives us a background to what we knew going into our project. And then Orth.
So just kind of in designing our project, as Amy said, we were looking to explore the experiences of women in Saskatchewan. So we were pretty intentional about really trying to select participants that, as best as we could, represented a variety of experiences. And so we had people who were in the late stages of their career. We had people who were in the early stages of their career. We had people who were working in small communities. We had people who worked in urban communities. We had people from the north, or who had experience in the north. But we ultimately ended up with 9 participants from our school division, Prairie Spirit, and then some from Prairie South. And again, just as Amy said, our purpose was really just to listen to 9 stories of women's journeys to educational leadership and see if there were some themes that stuck out to us. And we knew, I mean, and even in talking to Ellen at the beginning of this, that this very well may just be a first step, you know, like we're still kind of thinking about, so what's next now that we have kind of, the purpose of this was to start the conversation. And I'm so thrilled that there's 76 people here right now. I think that actually says a lot about, I'm going to take that as some feedback that we have been successful. If there's 76 people that want to talk about this tonight, that's part of what we were really hoping for by doing this project. So thank you for coming. I think I would just invite Jay to, we've created a little video that we hope will actually get some traction out there in social media. You know, we talked about, well, you write a paper, but who actually sits down and is going to read a research paper? I mean, you can get it if you want it, but we did try and create something that we hope will be shareable, that can continue the conversation even further. So we'll share that with you, and then I just have a few more comments to make before we turn it back over to Ellen. This is the part where we put all tech pressure on Jay.
Okay, so I'm told the sound is a little quiet, so I'm going to put the link in the chat if you have to move to the chat to watch or if you have to leave to watch the video. But I'll put it in now and we'll see how it goes.
As two female administrators midway through our careers, we have had several similar experiences that led us to undertake a McDowell research project. We wanted to explore the experiences of female leaders, the challenges or barriers they encountered, and their perceived impact on school culture. Going into our project, we knew that education is rooted in paternalism. Men traditionally hold leadership positions, and most teachers are women. We knew that women in educational leadership face internal and external barriers, such as family pressure and gender discrimination. And we knew that school culture is integral to healthy schools. It matters that schools have a sense of community, safety, and joy. We also knew that culture is dependent on leadership and relational trust. Our work surfaced several important ideas about women's experiences. The women had been learning leaders prior to becoming administrators. They had held learning support roles, had been involved in committee work, and had often acted as mentors to others. All participants indicated the importance of key relationships with mentors early in their career. However, most did not aim to become administrators early in their career and were shoulder tapped many times before moving into formal administrative positions. Additionally, family considerations, including when to enter administrative roles, whether or not they could parent and principal concurrently, and the need to care for aging parents played significantly into women's career choices. Throughout their careers, the women faced explicit and implicit gender discrimination from colleagues, parents, and students. In some cases, this included sexual and aggressive language directed towards them. Additionally, the women identified their perception of networks focused around sports that they benefited from early in their career, such as coaching that led to leadership experience. We also found that women perceive that there is an old boys club in Saskatchewan that influences hiring, and that many female leaders have encountered a glass ceiling that they feel prevents them from achieving higher positions. With regard to school culture, many women felt that they were able to lead schools and organizations through significant changes related to realigning policy and procedures when it required difficult conversations and challenging staff and community expectations. It was clear that the women we interviewed used intentional strategies to build relationships with their colleagues, which often led to relational trust with staff. Many women described a keen awareness of the big picture in their school, knowing who needed what in order to orchestrate a larger goal. The women's leadership styles seemed to be matriarchal in nature. They all mentioned the need to look after students and make them feel known. They described a seemingly primal need to fight for students who they felt were mistreated in the educational system. As leaders, women were comfortable with being vulnerable in their work, knowing that the answers and solutions came through collaboration. At the same time, a consistent theme was the necessity of providing tough feedback, but doing so in a way that maintains the dignity and moves the organization forward. Finally, all women described a focus on continuous learning improvement. They focused on making their schools or divisions better and not necessarily on their own career trajectory. Our study concludes with 3 recommendations. First, organizations should take steps to determine if there are specific informal networks in their organization that are perceived to have influence and power. Second, organizations should seek to facilitate informal and formal mentorship opportunities that lead to growth for young women. Third, all teachers need to recognize that education has roots in patriarchy, and we need to be proactive in dismantling traditional norms and expectations. Having female leaders in our school system is not just for a sense of equality or to ensure proportional representation of the larger teaching profession. It is for the girls we teach and lead. When they see females as teachers and only men in leadership positions, we perpetuate an idea that men lead and women follow, and we continue to transmit a patriarchal worldview from generation to generation. As we come to the end of our project, we acknowledge the determined women who paved the way for us, the strong women who serve as our role models and mentors today, and hope that our work will make the mountain taller for the ones who come after us. As 2 female administrators midway through our careers, we have had several similar experiences that led us to undertake a McDowell research
I
project.
think that's good, Jay. One time
I
through
wanted to explore the experience.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Thank you for managing it. So, I mean, we tried to encapsulate our work into that little video, and I guess I would just end our comments by highlighting probably that second recommendation there. The thing that seemed to really speak to us, and I think was actually our experience through doing the research, was in creating those meaningful relationships. And we were privileged to really get to hear, the raw story of these 9 women. And I really recognized the power in that. Like the more people that I could have that with, the better I would be as a leader. And so it just really has us thinking about, like, how do we create that opportunity for more people, for more of our young people that are starting out. So I guess I would just, I would leave it there with that idea. To me, that was the most powerful part of doing this. And the biggest thing that I'm left with is, how do we do more of that? So I'm going to be quiet because I think it's exciting that there's so many people here and we can have a great conversation. So.
Thank you, Amy and Amy. I think I did tell you earlier in the day that I'm so impressed with the video. What I would say to the participants here is Amy and Amy came to me in December and said, yeah, we don't know how to do this. We think we just have these ideas. And then like a month later, they produced something this amazing. I'll also highlight in the chat that that Kelly has added, I'm clapping, but you can't hear me. And I think maybe she speaks for a lot of us, that we're clapping even if you can't hear us. So, and I'm seeing clapping now, yes. So.
Ellen, I do just need to jump in and give the props for that to my partner, Amy, because she just kept saying, I kind of really like doing this, and just kind of kept doing it at night. And also thanks to those of you who gave us some feedback on the early versions. We really appreciated that. So thank you.
So thank you both, and thank you for sharing a bit about your research. So just to pull in the other amazing panelists that we have, as well as both of you, I have a couple of questions that I just kind of want to use to set the stage a little bit to kind of get us started. So I want to start with the most basic. Why is it important for us to be having this conversation? And maybe I'd invite Amy Orth or Amy Korver. They made me promise not to just say Amy, to start on that. And then I'd open it up to the other panelists to share. Why are we here? Why is it so important to have this conversation?
I can start us off. As I thought about that question, what was really striking when we talked to our participants is how different everybody's journey had been. all of the different things that different people had been through as they found their way to their current position and wherever they're going to go next. And it just occurred to us that there really is not a common story for women as they make their way through their journeys. And I think the reason why it's important to have this conversation is kind of, as I said, just to highlight as many of those as possible, because the more young people that can see, oh, you can do it that way, and oh, you can do it that way, and oh, you can still want that if you're going to do these things. I think those stories aren't as available to us as women. We don't always have as many models available to us. We don't necessarily see it in the media the way that it's present for others. So to me, I think the biggest reason to start this conversation is just to find ways to bring all of the different stories and the different journeys and the different ways that you can be a successful female leader to the forefront.
I think for me, I think of the girls that we're teaching. When I was growing up, I never saw a female administrator in any of the schools that I went to. And I never believed that I could be an administrator either. And even early on in my career, I didn't have that belief. And it actually wasn't until I kind of was pushed and nudged by Amy and Lori that I kind of seriously started to consider it. And there's the idea that you can only become what you see. And so when we have the girls in our school system who are there for 13 years and they're not seeing females in formal leadership positions, how do we convince them that they can go on and do that? I think that gender discrimination is still a big thing in 2021. I mean, we talk about the events of yesterday, and it was the first time a female was elected in the United States. But when we bring it to Canada, the most striking stat that always sticks with me is that there has been more first ministers in Canada, so more premiers and prime ministers named John than there has been females. And there's only been 12 in Canada. And so I think it's important for girls to see leaders everywhere and to recognize that one of the places that they're going to see them the most in their childhood is in their schools.
Samantha, did you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you, Ellen. When I thought about this question, I really thought about if we're not having the conversation as female leaders in education, then who is going to have the conversation? And I think that if we look at history and we look at our progress towards minimizing that gender gap, it has been so slow. I look at the progress that we've made on the board that I sit on for the STF, and I'm in my 6th year on that board, and for the first time this year, I have a 50-50 split on that board for gender. And I think that it is absolutely incredible, but I don't think that that could have happened without conversations like this happening and the mentorship piece that Amy and Amy talk about in their presentation. And for me, especially, I know we teach girls and women every single day, but I also have a 4-year-old and 6-year-old daughter. And so I look at what they're going to experience as they grow up and as they become adults. And I know the challenges that I have faced as a leader, and I don't want them to experience that same thing. So without having conversations like this, I think that progress will slow or stop or move backwards. And so I think that's why it's important that we're having these conversations, is to continue to move that progress forward.
Thanks, Samantha. Lori?
Well, good evening, everyone, and I'm really, really proud of the Amy's. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much. And when I thought about this, Samantha, that's exactly what I thought about, was we have to have this conversation because we have to have this conversation. This needs to be talked about, and a lot more than talked. And I think that's what you're provocating us to do, Amy and Amy, is now what, right? Like, let's do something with this. I thought about experience I had. I got to see Michelle Obama when she was in Saskatoon. And I remember that at one point in time, she put up on the screen her first lady portrait. She decided to do something very different than all the other first ladies had done. And it was stunning. And I remember I took my phone out because I wanted to look at the portrait closely, and you weren't allowed to have your phones out, and I got in trouble. But anyway, it was good I got in trouble because I should have been paying attention. And she was talking about the importance of modeling. And as you were speaking, Samantha, I was thinking about that as well, as the importance of all of those people that are watching us that we're aware of, and then all of the ones that we're not aware of that are also watching. And they're looking to see who's in the room and why and what are they doing. And we talk a lot in our school division about what other people will learn because you were in the room. And I think about that on about 50 different levels. And so what you've really invited us to think about is we need to talk about this because you've actually identified some really big things we need to pay attention to. So let's talk, and then let's do something about it. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation with all of you.
Thanks, Lori. Angela?
Well, good evening, everyone. And I too am just thrilled to see that so many people have joined tonight. I think it speaks, no, I don't think. It speaks to the fact that this is very relevant. And as Lori has said and the others have said, we're having a conversation because we need to have a conversation. Working at the STF has been extremely interesting, but I had the honor and the privilege of co-chairing a Women in Education committee as well this year. And I think one of the things that sticks out to me in terms of the research is that change takes time. We all know that. It's been decades, and Amy Korver can speak to this. We actually read a document that dates back, and although it was extremely, I mean, there were things that still some of the same issues. But I think the point that really caught my attention was that we need to build each other up. We need to create the network. And the data shows that change doesn't occur if you have one woman in a position of power. Change occurs when you have a group of women. Because women work through the system and have to fit into the system in order to get there. And it is only when there is another colleague or two colleagues at decision-making tables that things truly start to change. And I'm not one of these that believes that everything needs to be blown up and started again, but I do believe that we need to be more creative, and we need to see things in different ways for things to actually change. That's what these conversations are about. They often start with this hockey club or that on the golf course or whatever, and we do have to tell our stories, but it quickly progresses to, what do we need to do to change? Well, what if? Well, what if? And it's about being creative, such as the video that you did, creating networks, and building ourselves up. So thrilled to be here tonight.
Thank you, Angela. Maybe before I move on to the other question I had, there's a couple in the chat. And first of all, there is a question around whether or not the video can be made shareable. I certainly hope so. I hope to have it up actually on the McDowell website within the next day or two, with Amy and Amy's permission, of course. If they're going to sign off on it being final, I can get it up really quite quickly. There was also some compliments on the video, and I agree. It's lovely to see things like patriarchy and the old boys club and some of the things we've been talking about for a long time actually up and named and in sight. So thank you, Gwen, for pointing that out. But I'll just read one of the questions out of the chat, and maybe again, you can jump in and address it as you'd want to. In what ways can we influence these positions in power to create that mentorship and leadership opportunities? What actions do others see as necessary to influence our male comrades who are in positions of hiring and organizational influence? And thank you, Raquel, for outlining that question. So do Amy and Amy kind of want to start and then the others join in? Does that work?
Yeah, I can kind of respond to that in the context of you know, the project. I think what I kind of settled on after listening to the stories we heard is that I don't know if the concern is so much about like the hiring practices per se and like HR policy and like how like the more explicit things. I think it is much more in like who actually gets to the table. What do we think a principal looks like? And those things that are just nuanced and under the surface. And the other thing, like when we talk about the old boys club, like what was so striking to me is how many people referenced, and I'm in this too, that to me success as a young teacher included coaching. It included the relationships that I built through those extracurricular and social events, oftentimes with people in positions of leadership, but they got to know me. And that was the thing. They got to know me and then I knew them. And that was a big part of how I was able to grow, like to grow as a leader, you know, to become a principal. I know it was. It doesn't mean that I wasn't good, but I met people and developed relationships because of those things that I did. And so I wonder what other things can we create where more people can have opportunities like that? I really think that's key. It's not so much in how are like HR superintendents making decisions, it's in who's getting to those tables in the first place and how did they get there?
Yeah, we had this conversation actually last night, Amy and I, and one of the things we were talking about is we also need men as allies. Like this isn't just, you know, the women coming through, but we also need men to share their stories, but share their stories and reflect on how it might be different than a female story. So if you have two people who enter the teaching profession at the same time, how are their journeys different and why is that different? And then what can we do about it from there?
Would any of the other panelists like to jump in? I'm not going to pick on you anymore, but please jump in.
I would just like to suggest that you start by recognizing what is and truly recognizing what is. And that is both an organizational matter and an individual matter. That sounds really philosophical and profound. But, again, as a woman who's had my own experience, my own path, and I'm pretty lucky in my path. There's a lot of people that have faced greater adversity in developing as leaders. But sitting again and looking at the data that exists in 2021 and reading about the realities of women, it is what it is. And I think that pretending it isn't, or trying to justify without truly looking and saying, yeah, at least this is, we recognize that this is it. We recognize that there aren't as many women as there are men in leadership, and especially in higher leadership position in a career that is dominated by women. So it's recognizing what there is. Then it's looking at also bias. And you know what? We don't know what we don't know. And I don't condemn people that they don't recognize something because they can't see it. And that's a long conversation, but I think encouraging everyone out there to take a step back and say, what are my biases? And I think that does get to HR practices. I've sat on many a hiring panel, and we talk about the halo effect, where you look for someone who's like you. And that exists everywhere. You know, I always thought the best teacher was the teacher that looked and sounded like me. So I didn't, voice that or put that on the table, but gee, that's what I was looking for. So if it's mostly people who have grown up in a particular system, who have seen, as we said, leaders look and sound a certain way, that is the tendency, as we will continue to hire those people. So I think recognizing and putting that type of bias on the table is really important as well.
And we actually had a participant who like hit the nail on the head, and she identified, like, I wouldn't have been hired in many other divisions based on how I look. And so it's exactly that. We know what people are looking for, and sometimes it's not us.
I think about the those ideas of women in leadership, and I was taking a grad class, and in the class there was a section, we all got assigned sections to present, and the only other female and I got this section on women in leadership. So first of all, we thought that was a little off, and then we thought, we've got to go with this, let's make a point. So we did the initial motivational set. We brought in Kleenex boxes and chocolates and fluffy things and set it up. And then we just blew that up, right? And so I think, Angela, you talked about disrupting the stereotypes, right? And so like, that's the piece, right? It's like, show up. And like Amy said too, both Amy's, but you show up and you're in the room, and now what? So like, what am I bringing to the table? And you're right, we have to disrupt the idea of, well, we all need to kind of look and sound and act like this. And what we're looking for is, like, who can be a learner side by side with other people, right? And our leaders looking for that. If they're not, let's help them get there, right? And so those are parts of the disruptions of what's happening in a teacher's classroom, in a school setting as a principal and vice principal, and then in the other areas of the school division as well, right? And so how do we invite those disruptions everywhere? That's kind of a lot on us. And so I love the way you said it, Angela, where we actually have to come alongside each other and encourage each other, right? And so I'm like thrilled to pieces. I got the two Amy's talking here, and you are doing that. You are casting those sparks, not only in our division, but across the province. And you're inviting other people, come alongside and let's disrupt this thing. Let's make a big fire, guys. You're doing it. And I think that's what we have to do, right? That's all a big part of it. So I'm excited about the opportunities we have to not only look beside each other for who else we can walk alongside and encourage, but we're looking across and we're all saying, come with me. We've got some changes to make here, people. Let's do this together. So that's a huge part of what I think about.
I would just jump onto the end of what you said, Lori. Another thing that kind of comes out in our report is formal and informal mentorship. And like, so as female leaders, it's not all on us, but it is on us to do those informal things. I think in our paper somewhere we phrase it as like, go invite somebody for coffee. Like it has to start with those little things where you're intentional about bringing someone along with you to do exactly what you're saying, like big things, and little things. It's going to take a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I appreciate Amy bringing that up as well, those informal opportunities for mentorship. I think one thing that's really important, and kind of speaking to the first part of your question, that was in what ways can we influence those in positions of influence to create female mentorship? I don't think it always needs to be that imbalance of position when it's a mentorship opportunity either. I think that there can be co-mentorship opportunities where two people who are at the same level encourage each other and help each other to both move forward into something. So of course, yes, when there's someone who is already in a leadership role, reach out to them and ask them. And I would challenge everyone here that is in a leadership role as well to look at the people who are around you and reach out to them and try and help them along in their journey, but also look at the people who are on the same level as you, or if you're looking at getting into a leadership position, look at those people and try and work towards it together. I think that co-mentorship is just as valuable as a mentorship that comes from different levels.
I would just add on the mentorship piece, and this gets a little bit larger, but one of the things that the research shows also is that sometimes people who identify as women, and women we can be a little bit different, okay? Statistically, or data says that men will say I'm interested in being a principal very early in their career, thereby sending the signal, I would like to be mentored. And I'll speak personally here, not me. I'll just work and work and work, and dang it anyway, someone's going to recognize me and reward me for it. So, you know, that it's one of those subtle things, is we don't get ourselves on those formal pathways to leadership because we think we'll just put we'll just work hard and it'll be recognized. So there's subtle little things like that. And I'm not suggesting we need to change. We've had way too much time of being told that we need to change in order to succeed. But I am suggesting, again, we need to recognize that. So I agree. Mentorship can be formal, it can be informal, but if you are an aspiring administrator, say you're interested in this so that someone knows that they might be able to offer the mentorship.
I know one of the things we always talk about is there's a podcast that's focused on women in politics called No Second Chances. And Orth, you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's women who are entering politics have to enter or be asked 7 times, whereas men only are asked once and they jump at the opportunity. And I would say that it's very similar in education. The women that we interviewed were constantly being shoulder tap, shoulder tap, shoulder tap until they were finally like, okay, I think I'm good enough now.
I think some of these are really strong. And I think this is some of what I've seen from your research and what I've seen from other research. Some of the comments in the chat are kind of complicating things a little. And I think I'd like to kind of start to pull that in a little bit and talk a little bit about intersectionality as what I would refer to it. It's being referred to in the chat as women whose identities might be marginalized or women of color in educational leadership in Saskatchewan. What does it mean when you're looking at this screen and I'm very aware and I'm on this screen and I don't see myself yet, or I don't see who I would identify yet? What does it mean for those women, and how do we continue to provide leadership and mentorship and formal and informal and all of that when we start to bring in some of those kinds of questions as well? Again, throwing it out there, not picking on anyone.
Amy and Amy, I'd love to know if you had a story, an experience that was shared with you that would fit into that term of intersectionality. And if you do, go ahead.
And Orth, I'm going to let you tell this story so that you have time to think on it, if you can think of one, because I know we did, like, we were very cognizant to interview women who were of different ethnic minorities and include Indigenous women in our study. But we had this conversation last night, and we're very aware that we're 2 women who are white women who are middle class, and we hold a level of privilege that other women in our province do not have. And if we're looking at the kids that we're teaching and leading, our teaching force doesn't look like the students that we have in our classroom. And so I think we have to be very aware of where we are in a system of privilege and who isn't at the table.
If you gave me a hint about a story I was supposed to tell, I kind of missed it, Amy.
I just said you had time to think about one. I didn't give you a hint.
You know what, this just goes to show, and thank you for your comments and your questions, because every time we get together on committees or whatever it might be, we all know that anything we say is then exacerbated by the fact that a person might belong to another minority group, or I'll be honest, a group that is marginalized way more than I have ever been as a white woman. I mean, data collection, you start looking at leadership and you look at women, but then you look at women of color, Indigenous women, women who identify as being part of the queer community, women who are disabled, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's huge. So how do we get there? You know what? it's going to take us time, and it's also going to take the work of every time we sit down and have this conversation, bringing that up and saying, yes, we need to pay attention to. Yes, we need to make sure we have Indigenous women who are part of our panel. Yes, we need to make sure that we have people who are suffering from multiple, I would say multiple inequities. They need a voice, and we need to be the ones that ensure that that voice is heard. A little bit of political blah blah doesn't say a lot, and I apologize, but I think we got to keep having the conversations.
Totally agree, Ange. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that before? There are some more questions in the chat, but I certainly don't want to rush this. Very important that we continue some of these conversations. Moving to one of the chat questions, Jade asks, you mentioned that women in your study spoke of the need to be vulnerable in their leadership roles. Can you speak to the particular theme that arose in your study where vulnerability has been a strength of female leadership? So I'd throw that over to the Amy's to respond, and then I would invite the other panelists who wanted to wade into that, because I think this is a big part of the conversation.
So when we use the word vulnerability, what like a theme that came up in the women we talked to was just that, like somebody, I think it was Angela, said, you know, that we should speak up and say, I am interested in this position, or like that kind of a thing. What these women were talking about was that they weren't at all saying that. They were very much saying like, I mean, when difficult things were going on or they were trying to make something happen, it was also related to the idea of feedback, where it wasn't like, they were very intentional at not saying, here's what we're doing. They would say, I think maybe this is what we should do, and then go ask 47 people and then get the feedback and refine it and be very comfortable and know that that's the best way to do things, by going out there and saying, hey, I'm thinking about this, can you give me some feedback? And not being at all uncomfortable with not having it right, like with not having the answer. So I mean, our research was looking for themes, and that was one that shone through with everybody, is that idea of like, they were totally fine saying like, I don't really know what we should do here, but let's work together and try and figure this out. So that was kind of it was directly related to the idea of seeking out feedback. And then like kind of related to that was the idea of, this isn't related to vulnerability, but related to feedback, the idea of giving difficult feedback. Although when making difficult decisions, they were very comfortable being vulnerable, they were also very willing to kind of take the bull by the horns when something difficult needed to be said, but also were really good at doing that in a caring way, and like could speak about how they were thoughtful about having those difficult conversations so that people weren't wounded in the process, so that the organization came out stronger because of having had those conversations. So there was a lot tied up in that vulnerability and feedback kind of theme that we lumped together, but that was kind of it.
A lot of times, like one of the common themes, just to build on what Amy was saying, is like, I would pretty much say most of our women talked about times where they regularly, like, I remember the one woman said, like, I screw up every day, I don't hide it. And like, they were totally fine with the fact that they didn't hold all the power, didn't hold all the answers in their school, and were willing to seek help from other people rather than just make a decision on whatever limited background information they had.
Other panelists?
And I think that piece you guys are talking about in terms of seeing those female leaders step up and show that vulnerability of reaching out to their colleagues or their staff that they're working with also helps other people or other females that are aspiring to be leaders, because I think it can be overwhelming looking at a role and saying, I need to have all of the answers. I need to be able to lead all of the time, and seeing that team approach of a leadership as a leadership role can really help bring people forward as well, I think.
Yeah. I think too, it's a real balancing act. I read in a study that women leaders are either seen as competent or likable, and they're rarely seen as both, right? Like everyone either really loves you or they think you're really good at the job and you get her done. And I think there's a beautiful balance that comes when you can have both of those going on. And that just the idea of being vulnerable made me think about just this whole COVID season we've been in, right? And you're trying to pivot a school to supplemental learning, and it's optional, and your staff are at home, but you don't know if they're okay. And like I'm just soaking up the Amy's because I don't get to see them in person anymore. And it's just like, I need to see you. And so that's the piece that's missing, right? And I remember it was in the middle of June, and I remember you're just online meetings, and I was with my senior admin team, and we were talking about it. It seemed like it took 12 hours to solve a little problem because there were just so many nuances and things to think about. And we're talking, and they were kind of frustrated. I think that we weren't coming to let's just get to an answer already, right? And we're trying to check all the boxes and do all the right things. And I just stopped and I said, guys, I'm not sleeping at night. And it was like who says that, right, in a meeting? But I said, I can't sleep because I'm so worried about you. And I as soon as it was out of my mouth, was like, how do you pull that back in? Because I didn't want to say that. And you sound like, and I'm like, I got tears sitting kind of like right here, and I'm so worried about them. And I thought, what in the world have you just done? They're going to think you're overwhelmed and exhausted, and you're trying to give this, calm. You're the duck with the stuff going on underneath the water. Like that's what you're trying to do, to say, you guys, I got you. This is good. We're going to be okay. And I think as women in leadership, we have a beautiful opportunity to bring that balance, right, of the care and the competence. And we do that by building team and relationships and honoring all of those pieces.
Thank you, Lori. Ange, did you want to wade in, or should we keep going? Give me the signal. Good, keep going. Okay. So these are kind of a little bit connected, I think. So I want to kind of combine them. What about if you're not feeling overly good about your leadership, or as Michelle points out in the chat, what about this kind of idea of a smaller margin of error for women than there is for men? How do you, did you see anything in your research around women trying to navigate that balance between, am I good enough and am I being given enough leash, is sometimes the expression, as my colleagues? Or how do you navigate that kind of pressure of, am I good enough? Can I do this? Am I the person for this? So again, I'd like to start with Amy and then open it up.
That's such an interesting conversation. And the one thing I did want to highlight, and this might be the place to put it, we didn't hear from women who felt like they were constrained in any way. We heard very, very strongly that women were getting it done, regardless of what their title was or who had asked them to do something. We call it get stuff done, and you can fill in the actual word we were using, but I mean, it was whether they were like the ones that physically cleaning out the storage room or rewriting the school procedure when it was hard, or saying we're not doing that anymore, and oftentimes whether they'd been asked to or not. So there really wasn't that sense of like, people aren't letting me. But I think there was a sense, like when we kind of talk about that glass ceiling, there were people who had been doing that for a long time. And it kind of speaks to what you were talking to, Angela, where it's like, I feel like if I just work my ass off, somebody's going to notice, and then I will get where I'm trying to go. Because for lots of the women we talked to, it was like they'd been doing that for a long time. And then when it came to the interview or the job or the whatever, they weren't necessarily seeing the payoff of that. But they really felt like they had been taking the initiative and doing the hard stuff and in there down in the trenches. And they weren't asking for permission to do it, but they just weren't necessarily seeing the payoff in the end. So there was it didn't, I guess there's a sense of fairness. It didn't seem like it was fair based on their experience.
Yeah, and to add to that, a lot of times it was connected to like, I was good enough when you needed me, but then when I tried to move on, I wasn't good enough. And so it was interesting because we had participants who could say like, yeah, I did this, I did this, I did this, and then I applied for this, and I just kind of hit that glass ceiling, and they just couldn't move past it.
Two things that come to mind, and one is that I know that some of the articles and the research that I read said that in some cases, you know, it is felt within an organization that women can't make the mistakes that their male counterparts might make. But more prevalent, I think, in the research is that women are really hard on themselves. And because, and I don't want to say we, because it's not all we, women who are very, excuse me, hard on themselves, then sort of, they self-criticize to the point where I'm not sure I'm ready. I'm not sure I'm ready. I'm not sure I'm good enough. I'm not sure I have enough education. I better get some more schooling. I better take this course, right? And perpetuates itself. So there again is one of those things that isn't about us being, you know, taking more courses and becoming better people, but it is recognizing that everybody does make mistakes and that you have to forgive yourself. And boy, I'm the pot calling the kettle on that one. But I think that is part and parcel of that. I do think, however, not just I think, the research is still there that there are double standards though in so many different aspects that would be a whole other conversation. So. Sam, I'm interested. You're an elected official, so let me put you on the spot. Can women in elected positions or running for elected positions make mistakes? And we don't want to look at media and what's happened to women who have been just slandered in the media, but from your own personal perspective.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to wear the wrong outfit, right? I appreciate your point of how hard we are on ourselves. That's definitely something that I think I experience personally. I'm definitely very hard on myself and will analyze and overanalyze and reanalyze all of the things I say all of the time. In being an elected official, I haven't experienced it personally in terms of that type of criticism, but in my role as vice president, I'm not as overly public outside of our membership, but it's definitely something in the back of my head of, well, what would happen if I say the wrong thing, or what if I have to stand in front of the mic and I don't have the answer? I think, Amy, Orth, you had said that you can either be likable or be competent, and it's something that does weigh on me as a politician, so to say, is that obviously you need people to vote for you, and I would hope that they're voting for me because of my competencies, and hopefully because I'm likable, but it is a hard balance to balance those two things, to not come across cold or too calculated, I guess, and yet to be knowledgeable on a subject or in a certain
I would say too, the imposter syndrome is alive and well, and probably worse so for females, right? And so yeah, we can be so hard on ourselves, and it's the looking in the mirror sometimes needs to be done with a little bit of care for ourselves. And so I imagine, and I think I remember from your study that there was a lot of reference to that part too, and taking care of ourselves. And so I think about that as we take care of other people. I think one thing that's really important is having a coach or a mentor all the time. And so I have a coach that I meet with that asks me really hard questions. And I've put forward to my coach that this is what I want to learn about, and this is how I want to be. And then she pushes me there. And so I'm owning that journey. And it's really important that you have a coach that helps you and is walking alongside you in that way, that pushes you just enough to keep you going, but not so hard that you have someone else now thinking I can't do this either, right? So I think it's so important that that doesn't matter where you are and what you're doing right now. Get someone in your life that you can go to and say, this is what I want to work on right now. Can you help me get there? And the beauty of all of the people here today is there's a whole bunch of someone's like right here. And sometimes the most beautiful thing about women in leadership is the openness to walk alongside people, to build relationships and to support. And I think, again, Angela, I'll go back to what you said before. We have to encourage each other. The conversation has to happen, but we've got to encourage each other. This is hard work. And so we've got to do it side by side.
I can't echo what you said, Lori, enough. And I mean, you've modeled that for us. And it's something that I think we all, like, I want to get better at the skill. And this is what we said, of being able to push somebody hard, but but make them feel cared for at the same time. And Lori, that's what you do so well. That's what your coach does for you so well, where it's like, I know that I am cared for, but I also know I better have it together. Like, and that is I've been fortunate to have a number of women in my life who do that for me. I want to get really good at that, to do it for other people, because it's a critical balance to have both.
I think too, I would just add on the coaching thing for, a small little plug for my male colleagues is it's really important to have someone that you relate to as your coach, your mentor, or your friend. I have male colleagues that I go in and I put online, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to say. You know me, I can be a little bit like this. Tell me if I'm off, right? And some of those friends are women and some of those friends are men. So I think the important thing here is when we talk about mentorship, and I had this question, I don't know where we were, maybe it was in the committee or whatever. Do mentors have to be women, for women? No, they don't. But I think it's important that you have sort of like a choice in your mentor or coach, that person is providing for you what is necessary in order to push yourself or to check yourself. And I think it relates, and probably Ellen's going to go to the next question about emotion, and is it horrible to show emotion? I don't want to steal your thunder, but I see the question there, and it's in the research. Thanks, Ellen. Here I am taking over. Surprise, right? But you show vulnerability, you show emotion. Are you seen as weak? Are you not taken seriously when you say things? I'll share one example, and I won't say where I was, but I'm sitting at a very important table, and I had just finished speaking, and the comment I got was, well, it's obvious you're so passionate about this topic, and right off to address somebody else. It was dismissive without the person knowing they were being dismissive. So I'm going to stop there and let others talk about, especially Amy and Amy, in terms of emotion and vulnerability and that sort of thing. But I think this is still huge in what we perceive to be a good leader.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because a lot of the women that we interviewed identified their ability to share their emotion as actually a strength. And they called it like a matriarchal leadership. Like, I'm kind of like everybody's mom. And I remember one said, like, I'm kind, and what was the quote? It was like, I'll kick you in the butt, but I'll do it from a place of love. And that was very much kind of evident that the women that we interviewed didn't see it as a weakness. They saw it as a strength because it allowed them to create stronger relationships with their staff members.
I just have to add, Amy, you wait, because at first as a principal, and you'll be able to relate to it was mom. You'd get the kids calling you mom, mom. And then guys, it became grandma. So just wait.
Other thoughts on vulnerability? Ange was right. That's exactly where I was headed next.
So I appreciate the idea that, or your comment, Amy, about how women who are using that emotion as a strength, as that matriarchal leadership. I would maybe pose a question of how do young women then convey that same emotion and get that same type of respect when just due to age, they wouldn't be seen as that matriarch potentially.
Mm.
Maybe, I guess what comes to my mind is that maybe matriarchal wasn't, we were trying to find a word that brought it all together, but it was as much about the fight, you are not doing, this is not okay, this is not okay for those kids. And it wasn't as maternal as it was you got to go through me first, kind of a sense. And so in terms of showing emotion and getting riled up, they weren't stopping, and that I think that they were telling us that was seen as a positive trait. And mostly though, they were really proud of what it had led to in their schools and what they had set up because of that. And they could all point to examples where things had gotten better. They had saved kids. They had started things in their school because that was not okay. And they were going to fix it. And they did. And they didn't care who they kind of went through to do that. So.
You kind of make me think of Mother Bear as more than matriarchal, right? It's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And like you say, that and Angela, man, I've heard that comment too. Oh, you're so passionate about it.
Aww.
Oh, mercy.
It comes this so close to, oh, you're so cute.
Oh, I could buy some things with pennies from that comment. My goodness. I think about what you just said, Amy, and that you're going to have to get through me to that piece. And what I think is so powerful about women in leadership is the power of that care. And we're going to do right by these students. And you're going to have to go through me if you're going to do anything different, right? And so the power of the care put beside, we're actually going to get this done. That's a beautiful combination. And I think the vulnerability in some of that emotion is exactly that. I really go back to that likability thing again, and the confidence, right? If you are hard ass, you're doing your job and you can't get through me, I got this all locked up. There are people who criticize you for that, right? If you're likable and loving and fuzzy and come on, let's all sing kumbaya, then you get criticized for that. And so it's really trying to figure out when is this the right one? It's the toolbox you carry around as a leader all of the time. What's appropriate for this situation? And maybe we have to unleash our superpowers and peel back our shirts that there's Superman capes behind, that we actually have access to some pretty great tools as women in leadership. We do. And so those are powerful tools. And so when do we use them and how do we use them? And let's use them for good, right? And not evil. And so that's a really big, I think a really big part of vulnerability and how that plays into what we do. And I recognize that some of the comments in the chat, if you show a lot of passion and emotion, there are sometimes people who don't want to include you in the conversation anymore. That happens. How do you get yourself back in the conversation?
Lori, I'd like to actually, you've been scanning the chats, but there is the question, suggestions that you'd have for women, particularly younger women or women who are looking to get into leadership positions. what would be some suggestions you'd have for them? I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned the toolbox that women have. Can you start to unpack that for me? And then we'll expand that question out to the other panelists as well, recognizing that all of you are leaders on this panel.
Oh, yeah. There's so many things that are beautiful about being a leader, and that starts when you're 5 in your kindergarten class playing in the sandbox, right? Like those pieces, we get opportunities all throughout our lives to do that. And I think some of the things that go into your toolbox are really who you see yourself as and who you see others as. And I love to think about once a teacher, always a teacher. And it doesn't matter whether I'm in a boardroom with my board, whether I'm sitting down with my senior admin team, whether I get to be with the administrators and principals like in our division, or I'm in a classroom of students. It's your stance. And so your stance as a leader is so important. Do you come with, I've got all the answers and I'll tell you what they are, and now we'll get the work done and go do your thing, or do you come in with that stance of I'm a learner too, and I'm going to come alongside this problem if there is one together? And so it's learning how to be a team player. And I think, Amy, you mentioned that at the beginning. There's a lot of skills we learn as leaders in athletics. And I think, I don't know how many of the people that were in your study were once coaches, right? So, I mean, I coached for 26 years senior basketball, and the things that I learned from senior basketball are tools in my toolbox right now. What do we do when we've got a problem? We call a timeout. We focus on a spot on the floor because otherwise senior girls are looking at their boyfriends in the stands, right? And so that's just a silly comment, I'm sorry. That did happen, but yes. But you got to, like, how do you focus, right? And what do we focus on? And how do we get people to focus? And how do we invite everyone to focus? And what's our common goal? And what are those pieces? And so I think I would say, again, get a mentor in your life, whoever that's going to be, someone that helps you. And I think talk to people that you get to be with. I think the most important thing you can do is find someone in your school division that you can call up and go, I'd like to go for coffee with you. Right now, it might have to be online, but let's talk. I want to talk to you about what have you learned about being a leader. And all of a sudden you're going to go, I've done that. Not maybe with the same people or whatever, but I've done that. Oh, okay. All right. And like, that's the piece. I think just start, just ask, just look for someone and notice all the time. What do you like about, this used to drive my kids crazy, but you go in a restaurant and there's a really powerful waiter that's going around and you watch them, and my boys' heads would go down already, right? Because I would call them over and go, hey, can I give you some feedback? Mom, right? But I noticed this, and this, and this. Like, I didn't know anyone was watching. So watch the people that you are around. Watch people who are in leadership positions. What can you learn from them? And that's a stance. Be a learner. Like that, to me, that would be number one. But I think there's so much expertise.
One of the things that stuck with me is one of our participants called it finding your true north. So who's your person that you are always, if you're in a sticky situation, who are you going to look to and think, what would this person do? And use that kind of as your compass as you're going through. So that could be a mentor, or it could be somebody that you're admiring. What would they do in this situation?
Yeah, I would echo your thoughts, Amy, as well. I think that a lot of good leaders that we could all think of have a great sense of self-awareness. And they, to Lori's point, they know who they are. They know how they see themselves. But along with that, you need to know how you want to be seen and how you want others to actually see you. And so kind of tying those 2 points together is, I had been at a conference and it was suggested to have a wise council, right? So have a group of not just one mentor, but have 2 or 3 or more trusted individuals that are part of your inner circle that you can go to about different things, to be a sounding board for you, to say, how did I come across in this meeting? Like, you know how you're perceiving the situation, but you need to know how others are perceiving the situation as well. And not all leaders need a title either. That was something that I've been thinking about as part of this conversation too, is that you can be a leader without having a title attached to it. I'm a leader in different situations, even though I have a title in one situation or in one part of my life. But I can be a leader in other areas without any title attached to it.
I'm just going to build on what Lori said and then what you said, Sam. I think one of the best pieces of advice, if I dare to give advice, is learn from everybody is right. Learn even from the people that don't think are great leaders, because that sitting back and saying to yourself, what would I do differently? Rather than just criticizing, what would I do differently? And then I agree with you, Sam, having the wide council provides different perspectives. And again, is all, we're talking all our white women privilege here. You need different perspectives. You need to understand that a particular topic, question, applies to people in different ways depending on their situation. So and I agree with Lori, I think we are extremely well equipped to deal with that, but take the time to watch, to listen, and to build yourself. Believe in yourself. If there's one thing I could say, it's that. You don't have to go out and another statistic, women will take more courses and more degrees to be more qualified. I think it's more, know that you have the capacity, and sometimes it's just, follow your gut in the sense that I know I can do this, and you will do it, and you will learn as you go, because that's what we all do in leadership positions.
I think, Angela, that kind of comes back around to the idea of the path, like the path that is well developed for some, right? And it is less developed for others. And it speaks to providing that model for others. It's like, I mean, I can think of people that I know and have worked with where it's almost assumed, well, I mean, you've been the senior math teacher for 8 years, so aren't you going to be the VP? Like, that's kind of what happens, right? Or you've been the basketball coach and the whatever. That path is not trodden for women the way that it is for some men. And so it speaks to creating that path for others so that others can see what their path could be.
And I would suggest, Amy, that it's also the same for women. And, again, we know this, we're not all the same. For a woman who maybe chooses not to have children and doesn't have to have that balance, her path is going to be very different from the path of even myself, who, waited till later in life to do it. Like, all of our paths are different. So I think you're right. Having multiple paths and multiple ways to support people, that's creativity that I was talking about before. We just have to start to be different a little bit, to challenge what is, and not feel intimidated by doing things a little differently.
And you're anticipating again. I think you're reviewing the questions now. That's where we were kind of going next, is some kind of more practical based questions. Did it come up in the research, some of the double days that women put in of having significantly more caring responsibilities, having even more caring responsibilities within the profession, perhaps? And then thinking about some of the gender constructs as who gets defined as official leaders in the profession of teaching, and how do we start to maybe pull at those threads a little bit? So I'd invite, Angela's already kind of led us there beautifully. I'd invite you to pick that up and see where you go with it.
I think one of the things that came up that was really evident in the women that we interviewed was family was a huge factor in making choices, whether it was to pursue leadership roles later in their career, to change schools based on their family. We interviewed one woman who said, like, it was either I had a third child or I stayed being a principal and making that choice. So it was very much kind of front and center in their minds of how do I navigate this dynamic.
So
Did anyone see the, sorry, Lori, go ahead.
No, I'll wait.
I was just going to say, did anyone hear on the news, Saskatoon, woman, her husband and her trying to shuffle family, they doing 50-50, kids are at home, couldn't do it. Woman goes in, asks for a reduction in her contract. Boss says, time out. No way are you going to suffer because of this. Point is, creativity. I would love to do more research. I would love to know how many principals there are that job share. And what's wrong? I have heard that that's not possible in a principalship. Well, why not? I don't know. But I think that it is time to, in some ways, stop making excuses and start to be creative. And it's not just about women, because more and more men, although majority are women, according to the data, who do primary care for children and for the elderly, but that is shifting. And this is about, if people choose to have families, if people have elderly family that they need to care for, where are the creative solutions?
You're inspiring me, Angela, because I not to get too personal, but I'm 100% struggling with that right now. I am currently pregnant. I am trying to figure out what kind of a mat leave I want to take. I love my work. I don't want to miss out, and it's not missing out on the like climbing the ladder. I don't want to be a year behind when I come back to work. And it's the timing is crazy, being immersed in this research and now just living the decision, because I 100% feel the pressure of like, oh, I need to give this little baby a full year or 18 months of my love every day at home. And then on the other hand, I feel like I just really don't want to miss out on work. And I am 100%, I have no decisions made. I'm 100% struggling with it right now. So when you talk about creativity, I need to go find my girls and go have a conversation, because I'm really struggling right now. It's a hard thing to figure out. And it's so ironic that now I was immersed in listening to other people for 2 years, and now I'm like, So.
I was going to pull the old card. So I'm very old. And when I was first pregnant with my oldest, I was a principal, and I was told we don't give maternity leaves for principals. So I had to give up my principalship to go back to a classroom. And I say had to, but it's kind of a get to, because there's always good things that come out of decisions, etc.
Did you change that policy?
That policy is no more. I think a few other very important people did that change, but yes, right? Like that's a big piece. Am I glad that I did that? Absolutely. I have 2 great kids, and they're 4 years apart. Amy, you're gonna love that. That's a beauty age range, 2 boys. So you're gonna love that. But that's a huge piece, right? You're constantly balancing those pieces. I happen to have a wonderful husband who also was working at home, and so we got to share some of that load and do that together, right? And so that's a big part. And I think in any job that you do, you want to kind of give 110%. And so that becomes really tricky when you're 100% principal and 100% mom, right? Like, and wife and daughter and sister and friend and colleague and all of those pieces, right? And so that becomes the balance. And again, we all have to find our path for what works for us. And again, I encourage you to look at other people and see how they're doing it. Ask them, how are you holding that together, right? Like that's huge.
I went through kind of a similar situation, but again, being an elected official is a little bit different than fulfilling a hired role. So I got pregnant with my second child after I had been elected to the executive, and continued to fill that role throughout my maternity leave. But I always felt like, and I don't think that it was real, I think it was just completely perceived on my part, that if I missed out on any of my responsibilities, if I missed a meeting, if I didn't get there for something, I didn't want it to ever be blamed on the fact that I was pregnant or that I was a new mom or anything. So I attended all of my meetings. I didn't miss any meetings. I was 9 months pregnant at one of the meetings, and I remember my mom and my husband telling me like, why are you driving to Saskatoon? But I think that that's one of the positives that have come out of this too, is that we can find those creative ways. Like, we have so much technology and we're forced to use it now, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used in the future. And I think that seeing the possibility of, I know at council for STF members that have attended council, there's more and more babies that have been showing up. And now with Elena Young and the legislature, seeing a baby in those photos, I think that it is really inspiring for so many young women to see that they can still fulfill the role and be a great mom and be a great politician or elected official. But I think that you can also say no to those things too and take a step back, and that is completely fine as well. I struggle with knowing what I can ask for and what I can't ask for, and worrying about the judgment for when I ask for something. And I think that that's something a lot of women struggle with as well, is that need to or feel like they are less than or not fulfilling their role because they I don't know, it's not an accommodation, right? Like, it's, this doesn't fit my life. What can we do to fix that? So I appreciate the creative solutions that we've talked about a little bit, and that are opportunities, but I think that women need to also accept that it doesn't mean that you're less than, it just means that it doesn't fit for you.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm kind of aware that we're winding down on time, which is shocking to me. We've been here for almost an hour and a half, and it feels like about 10 minutes. So as we're wrapping up, I just want to invite both Amy and the other panelists for kind of a last word. I have a few things I want to say in relation to the foundation, but maybe we'll start with Amy Orth, with Orth, as they call each other, and then move to Amy Korver, and then invite the other panelists. Just if you can keep it to about a minute and kind of do a wrap up, that would be great.
I feel like I've talked a lot and I don't have anything new or groundbreaking to share, but it is interesting how even just this conversation again has filled me up, right? It's the same experience that we had as we talked with our participants, and it just brings it back to me how important it is to have meaningful relationships with people who are kind of walking the same path, well, not the same path, a very different path than you, and sharing those stories, and just how important that is. And again, it just brings me back to that informal mentorship piece that comes out of our study, where it's important that we have these conversations with each other. So I guess I would just end by being thankful to everybody who came out tonight to participate, because it highlights the importance of the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, Orth kind of stole mine, but I guess I'm just, the conversation, it just can't stop here. Like Lori said, like, we need to build that bonfire, and it needs to be big, and it needs to be continuous, and it can't go out. I know Sam said something about this was the first year she's been on the executive where they've had gender parity. And I just, like, I hope that becomes the new normal, and it's not just a one-off, because then we're just setting ourselves back again. So I think the big thing is going to be to continue the conversations, and I think they're going to be hard sometimes, but it's important.
I'm going to steal somebody else's words, but I think they're so powerful. And I always choose a word for the year. My word this year is light. And I think about what Amanda Gorman said at the inauguration, the poet, and she said, "There's always light if only we're brave enough to see it, and if only we're brave enough to be it." And so I would encourage every one of you to be that light that I know is inside of you, and we need it. We need that light. And I encourage this conversation to keep on going.
Ange?
Sam and I are looking at it. This conversation is going to continue, and there are going to be other conversations. Sneak preview for all of the people who have joined us, based on the work of the Women in Education Committee and now the newly labeled Women in Leadership. We will be putting together some initiatives. Well, we have put together some initiatives which will include some fireside chats coming to you soon, so stay tuned. We plan to continue conversation and provide some continuing opportunities for networking for those people who identify as women in our profession. Thank you, Amy and Amy.
Sam, do you want a last word?
Sure, thank you. I would echo what everyone has said to kind of wrap up this evening. I think that this conversation and conversations like this are so important. But tying back to what was said before, it can't just be women that are a part of this conversation. We need our male counterparts as allies as part of the conversation. And I'm going to call out Pat Mays because I see he is on there as a leader of the organization. And I think that having males in leadership as allies to ensure that they recognize those unconscious biases and how they fulfill their role is also so very important. So I thank all of the males who are here, and I would also challenge all of the females going forward to have a conversation with the men in your life, or invite them to come into a conversation like this in the future.
Thank you, Samantha. And in the chat, and I'm assuming quite jokingly, someone asked if we were going to identify all of the men who attended tonight. And I assure you I am not, but I am very grateful that there were a number of men who happily took up our invitation, who joined in the conversation, who entered their names into the chat, and I know are willing to participate as we move forward. So thank you to them and to all of you for taking time to join us tonight. So the mission of the McDowell Foundation is enriching teaching and learning by supporting professionally led research. And I have to tell you, I sometimes say I have the best job in the world, and tonight is one of those nights because I get to support teachers like Amy and Amy doing just this amazing work. I get to be the person they call when they're excited. I get to be the person they call when they're frustrated. And I get to provide opportunities like this for these conversations that I think are just vital to the profession. And there aren't always spaces for that. You know, how do we start these conversations? We start them by having them. And I'm really pleased that we were able to provide space for this conversation tonight. And I hope it is just the beginning. These conversations need to continue to happen in classrooms, in staff rooms, in boardrooms, in all of the places where those sparks need to take fire. And thank you to those of you who have made this part of it. So the foundation exists because we believe in the professionalism of teachers. And for me, I love the work that I do. We need to ensure this research comes from us, not from those external spaces and places that sometimes research comes from. I've thrown into the link bibliography the Emma Stewart Resource Center has put together that is some of that research from afar, but we need to make it our own. And McDowell provides opportunity to do that, and I'm so grateful I get to support that every day. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the link I've provided in the chat of some of the resources you can look at to continue this conversation. Take a look at the link to the McDowell Foundation that I've provided, see what other researchers are out there. We have some pretty cool stuff going on, and maybe make a donation. We are a nonprofit charitable organization. We appreciate the support of the STF, but we also appreciate our donors. So thank you for joining me Thursday night. Thank you for coming together and having this amazing chat. To the panelists, I'm in awe of you and I appreciate your work. Have a good night, and I look forward to being part of these conversations as we move forward. Night all. Amy and Amy, if you aren't, I encourage you to read some of the chat. It's really quite something.
Yeah, I've kind of been watching.
Yeah, it's nice when you have a couple panelists because you can take a look at the chat while we like having one ear listening.
I see Jade wrote a novel.
I know.
You gotta love Jade for that though, right?
I love Jade for that.
I do too. I do too.
That was really great. Thank you, everybody. I'm
Amy and Amy, I don't know, well, you wouldn't know this.